The floorboards groaned under Evelyn Shaw's tired boots as she scrubbed the kitchen floor for the third time that day. Her knees burned from hours of work, but she did not dare slow down. Aunt Prudence sat in her rocking chair by the window, watching her like a hawk, ready to strike at the smallest flaw. "Missed a spot," Aunt Prudence snapped, tapping her cane against the floor. "Lazy girl, your mother would be ashamed if she could see you now." Evelyn said nothing. She had learned to hold her tongue in this house. She was 18 years old and had spent 6 of those years living under her aunt's cold roof. Since her parents died from scarlet fever when she was just 12, Aunt Prudence had taken her in with one promise: food and shelter. But the price had been high. Endless chores, cruel words, and never a kind touch. Outside, the cold autumn wind rattled the windows. Coal smoke and horse manure drifted in from the street. Evelyn paused for a moment to look out the glass. People bustled about, women in fine dresses, children laughing, men talking as they passed. They all belonged to a world that Evelyn only watched from behind dirty panes of glass. "Stop daydreaming," Aunt Prudence barked. "Dust the parlor and then help Martha with the washing. That girl is nothing without your help." Evelyn picked up her supplies and headed toward the front room. As she passed the hall table, a newspaper caught her eye. It was half folded, and something in the corner made her pause. Her heart thudded as she leaned closer. "Respectable rancher, age 32, the advertisement began. Seeks correspondence with marriageable woman willing to make home in Colorado territory. No cooking skills required, only a heart that wishes to be loved. Write to Mr. Thomas Barrett, Pine Ridge, Colorado." A heart that wishes to be loved. Evelyn's throat tightened. She reread the line until she was sure she would never forget it. A man who didn't want a maid or a cook, but someone with a heart. She didn't know if the words were true, but they felt like a lifeline. That night, she lay awake on her narrow cot in the attic, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The house was silent, except for the wind moaning outside. She thought of the other young women who had gone west as mail-order brides. Some found hope, others found hardship. But what did she have here? Nothing but work and insults. If Aunt Prudence died, her cousin Harold would throw her out on the street within the week. That thought helped her make her choice. 4 nights later, when Aunt Prudence was already in bed, Evelyn crept into the study. She lit a candle, pulled out paper and pen, and wrote with shaking hands. "Dear Mr. Barrett, I am 18 years of age. I am of good character, accustomed to hard work, and have no family to speak of. I am honest. I have no dowry and few possessions, but I seek a life beyond sorrow and cruelty. If it is a home and kindness you offer, I would be grateful for the chance to prove myself. Most sincerely, Miss Evelyn Shaw." She mailed the letter the next morning using coins she had saved from selling eggs on the side. Then the waiting began. 2 weeks passed. Each day, Evelyn held her breath when the post arrived, and each time she had to hide her disappointment. But one afternoon, when the house was quiet, Martha slipped her a letter. "It's for you," she whispered. "I didn't tell your aunt." Evelyn thanked her and ran to the attic, heart pounding as she broke the seal. Thomas Barrett's handwriting was uneven but steady. "Miss Shaw, your honesty is welcome. Life here is simple but hard. The land is unforgiving. Winters are long. The town is small, but I mean what I say. A man can build something from nothing out here if he has someone to share it with. I offer marriage, a home, and respect. If you are still willing, I will send money for your passage. Yours respectfully, Thomas Barrett." Evelyn pressed her hand over her mouth to quiet her sobs. At last, someone offered her not judgment or scorn, but a chance. That night, she packed her small bag. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a faded photograph of her parents, a tiny sewing kit she had hidden from Aunt Prudence. Before dawn, she left a short note on the kitchen table. "I have gone to seek work. Do not look for me." She slipped out the back door and walked straight to the train station. The journey west changed her. She passed through broad farmlands, wide open fields, and towns where nobody knew her name. She sat among families, chasing dreams, and other young women with secrets held tight. Some looked as frightened as she felt, but with each mile she felt a strange new thing growing inside her. Hope. Colorado was nothing like Philadelphia. The sky was huge and open, the air sharp and cold. Pine Ridge was barely more than a dusty road with a handful of buildings. As Evelyn stepped off the train, clutching her carpet bag, the wind whipped her hair around her face. Men stared at her openly, but she kept her head high. Then, she saw him. A tall man stood by a wagon. His clothes were worn, and his posture was strong but uncertain. His hat was in his hand. When their eyes met, something passed between them: fear, hope, curiosity. "Miss Shaw?" he asked in a deep voice. "Mr. Barrett," she said, trying to sound calm as her heart raced. He nodded, awkward. "Welcome to Pine Ridge." Evelyn climbed into the wagon, trembling slightly as they rode through the town. In less than 2 hours she would be his wife, a stranger, yet the only person who had ever asked what kind of heart she carried, not just what she could do. Ahead lay the vast plains of Colorado, and a new life she had only dared to pray for. The sun hung low in the sky as Thomas guided the wagon toward his ranch. Evelyn gripped the seat with one hand and her carpet bag with the other, taking in the endless grasslands stretching to the distant purple mountains. When the small wooden house came into view, her breath caught. It was plain, weathered, and alone on the land. But it was hers now. They said their vows in the small church within the hour. Only the preacher, his wife, and a man smelling of whiskey stood as witnesses. The ceremony was brief. The ring, a thin gold band with scratches from years of wear, slid onto her finger and sealed her fate. She was no longer Evelyn Shaw. She was Mrs. Thomas Barrett. Back at the ranch, Thomas showed her inside. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke. The single main room held a rough table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a stove that had seen better years. The walls were bare, no curtains, no family pictures, just plain, hard living. "I know it's not much," Thomas said, his hat in his hands. "I meant to fix it up before you came. Just didn't get to it in time." "It's quiet," Evelyn said, "peaceful." He seemed relieved at her answer. He carried her bag into a small side room. "This is yours," he said. "Your space." Evelyn froze in the doorway. "My room?" Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll sleep in the barn loft. I thought it better we, get to know each other first." She stared at him. In Philadelphia, a husband never asked permission. He simply took what was his. Yet here he was, offering space, offering choice. "You don't have to sleep in the barn," she said quietly. "We're married." "And I'm not owed anything," Thomas replied. "You came here out of need, not love. I want you to feel safe. If you're ready, I'll be here." It was the gentlest truth Evelyn had ever heard. She nodded, and he left her to settle in. The first week was awkward and lonely. Thomas left before dawn, leaving eggs and coffee on the stove. He returned at dusk, cleaned up, and ate the meals she made, always with polite thanks. They talked only of practical things: the weather, the animals, supplies they might need. But in the quiet hours, while she scrubbed and swept and tried to make the house feel like a home, Evelyn could sense the walls between them. Not of anger or coldness, but of caution and grief. He seemed to carry a weight she couldn't yet name. On the 8th day, she found him standing in the doorway, looking at the curtains she had sewn from old flour sacks. The sunlight glowed through them, turning the room warm and golden. "They look like sunshine," he said softly. Evelyn smiled. "They're just scraps. Nothing fancy." "My mother used to hang yellow curtains," he said, almost to himself, "when I was a boy, back in Ohio." Quote, it was the first thing he had ever revealed about his past. She waited for more, but he quickly turned and went outside. Loneliness crept in, but so did determination. Evelyn scrubbed the floors, aired out the bedding, planted a small patch of herbs by the kitchen door. She washed the windows until the view of the world outside was clear and clean. One evening, near sunset, Evelyn carried supper outside and ate on the porch steps. The sky stretched wide above her, streaked in orange and gold. She had never seen anything so big or so beautiful. She wondered what her parents would think of her now. Would they see bravery or foolishness? She jumped when she heard footsteps behind her. "Mind if I sit?" Thomas asked. She moved aside and he lowered himself beside her. They ate in silence for a long time. The air hummed with crickets, and the breeze rustled the tall grass. "You ever feel like the quiet is too loud?" Thomas asked suddenly. Evelyn glanced at him. "Sometimes. Back home I longed for peace, but here the peace can swallow you." He nodded. "That's what my brother said, when he was still alive." His voice broke a little and Evelyn turned to face him fully. "What happened to him?" "Fever," Thomas said, staring at the horizon. "We were building this place together. He was the one who wanted to come west. I just followed because he couldn't be here alone. After he died, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house was built, the land was ours. And yet, it didn't feel like living anymore," Evelyn finished softly. Thomas nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. "That's why I wrote that advertisement. I wasn't looking for a cook or a maid. Just someone who knew how to stay." The porch fell silent again, but it was not the heavy silence from before. It was softer, shared. As the last light faded, Evelyn found herself wanting to stay in that moment forever. Over the coming weeks, the distance between them slowly closed. They played checkers in the evenings by lamplight. Evelyn read aloud from her mother's Bible, and an old almanac Thomas owned. His reading was slow, but his voice was steady and kind. Every so often, she caught him watching her, not like a stranger or a master, but like someone afraid to hope. Then winter came early. One night, a terrible wind howled around the house. The barn doors slammed open and shut. Thomas rushed to fix them. Evelyn built up the fire, hearing the storm rage and the wood groan. But time passed, too much time. He did not return. Panic rose in her chest. She wrapped herself in a coat, grabbed a lantern, and fought through the storm. The cold burned like needles, and winds stole her breath, but she pressed on. She found him face down in the snow, barely conscious. Blood from a gash on his forehead had frozen at his temple. "Thomas!" she cried, falling to her knees. Her hands shook with fear, but she wasn't helpless. She dragged him back to the house, inch by inch, heart pounding. All night she nursed him. She cleaned his wound, warmed rocks by the fire, and wrapped them in cloth to place at his sides. She spooned broth into his mouth, prayed over him, and stayed awake through the long, dark hours. He mumbled in his fever, calling her name. "Don't leave," he whispered, grasping her hand. "I'm here," she whispered back. "I'm not going anywhere." In the morning, his eyes opened. He looked at her with wonder, as if seeing her for the first time. "You saved my life," he whispered. When she tried to downplay it, he stopped her. "You did. You stayed." For the first time since she'd come west, Evelyn felt her heart truly settle. In his weakest moment, Thomas had turned toward her, not as an obligation, but as a man reaching for someone he trusted. As the storm raged outside, inside a new bond had formed. Quiet, fragile, real. Their beginning had been built on desperation. But now, something else had taken root. Love. And Evelyn began to understand her own truth. The frontier might be harsh, but the heart could grow even in the hardest soil. Now, at last, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Winter passed slowly, but when spring finally arrived, the land seemed to breathe again. Snow melted into trickling streams, and green shoots pushed up through the thawing earth. The sky spread high and wide, and with it, hope bloomed too. For the first time, Evelyn felt like she belonged somewhere. Thomas recovered fully from the storm, a thin scar, the only reminder of their brush with danger. But something else had changed as well. The distance he'd once kept between them had vanished, like the last of the snow. He began to seek her company, not out of politeness, but out of need. One morning he saddled 2 horses and called to her from the yard. "Come on, time you learned to ride." Evelyn hesitated, "I don't know how." "I'll teach you," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting. Buttercup here's gentle as can be. With Thomas's careful hands guiding hers, Evelyn learned to sit the saddle, hold the reins, and move with the horse. Her first ride was clumsy and painful, but the sense of freedom was something she'd never known. As they rode across the open land, wind whipping her hair, Evelyn realized this was what living felt like, not just surviving someone else's rules. They stopped by a small creek, swollen with spring melt. Thomas spread out a blanket and unpacked a meal she had made, cold beef, bread, and wild onions she'd picked near the house. "Thank you," he said, looking at her with something new in his eyes. Softness, gratitude, affection. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm. For what? For making this place feel like home again. They rested under the shade of a cottonwood tree, and as birds sang overhead and the water glittered, Evelyn felt peace settle into her bones. But peace didn't last long on the frontier. Summer brought long days and harder work. Evelyn grew more confident in the tasks of ranch life, milking cows, fixing fences, baking bread in the stubborn stove. She learned to clean and load Thomas's rifle, to recognize the signs of a storm coming, and to treat minor injuries with the herbs she'd coaxed into growing by the kitchen door. She also noticed something new within herself. Fatigue, morning sickness, dizziness she couldn't explain. It wasn't until she counted the weeks and months that realization struck. Her breath caught. She was carrying their child. The thought filled her with joy and terror. One part of her wanted to run to Thomas immediately and tell him, but another part of her hesitated. She still remembered the fear in his eyes when she had nearly died in the storm. Would this news bring him joy or reopen his deepest wounds? Before she could make her choice, rumors found her. She had gone into town for supplies one morning. As she browsed the fabric section, she overheard two women whispering. Mail-order bride, so young, one said. What could she have offered him? Service, the other replied with a snicker, and now a baby to trap him permanently. Wouldn't surprise me if she planned it. Evelyn froze, shame and anger rushing through her. She turned away without confronting them. Their words echoed in her mind, poisoning her happiness. What if they were right? What if people thought she was using the baby to secure her place? Back at the ranch, she tried to hide her worries, but Thomas noticed the storm brewing behind her eyes. "What's troubling you?" he asked gently after supper that night. Evelyn hesitated, then decided that if she wanted their marriage to grow, it had to be built on truth. She took a deep breath. "Thomas," she said softly, "I'm with child." Time seemed to stop. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared. Then he turned away, running a hand over his mouth. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Yes." He paced the floor like a trapped animal, struggling for air. Evelyn watched him, her fear rising. "Thomas," she said, her voice breaking, "talk to me." He stopped and looked at her with haunted eyes. "My mother died in childbirth," he said. "The baby, too. I was 8. I remember every scream, every hour of it. I can't go through that again." "Not with you." Tears prickled Evelyn's eyes, not from anger but sadness. "You won't lose me?" she whispered. "You don't know that," he said, his voice rough. "Not out here, not without a doctor. What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll prepare," she said, steady now. "We'll go into town early, we'll stay near the doctor. We'll do everything right. But I refuse to live in fear, and I refuse to let you push me away to avoid feeling afraid." Thomas's shoulders slumped. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "I love you," he said, voice breaking. "I love you more than I ever expected I could love anyone. That's what terrifies me." Evelyn stepped to him and took his hands. "Then let's face the fear together. No more distance, no more running." He pulled her close, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. "I'll stay," he whispered, "every step of the way." And he did. As her belly grew, Thomas became fiercely protective. He wouldn't let her lift heavy buckets, brought her flowers from the pasture, kissed her belly when he thought she wasn't looking. He built a cradle from wood he cut and sanded by hand, every joint crafted with care. One night, she found him sitting by the cradle long after she had gone to bed. He was staring at it, eyes soft. "I've never been so afraid," he whispered when she approached quietly. "Fear means you care," she said. "And love is worth the fear." Winter came early that year. A blizzard howled through the night when Evelyn's labor began, a month earlier than expected. Thomas tried to stay calm, but she saw the panic in his eyes. The doctor was miles away. The roads were buried. They were alone. Or so they thought. Just before dawn, over the roar of the storm, came the crunch of hooves and a knock at the door. Thomas opened it and gasped. Joseph Standing Bear, a local native man Thomas had once helped, stood there with his grandmother, Mary Two Rivers. She was a midwife. Experienced, calm, capable. Together they guided Evelyn through the hardest hours of her life. It was long and painful, and at one point, Evelyn felt the world slipping away, but Thomas never left her side. He held her hand, whispered love, begged her to fight. And then, with Mary's guidance, a cry. A daughter. Strong lungs, strong will, perfect. They named her Hope. Evelyn cradled the tiny, warm bundle in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Thomas stood beside her, speechless. Hope's tiny fist wrapped tightly around his thumb. "Thank you," he whispered to Mary and Joseph. "Thank you for saving them." Mary placed a small, beaded charm over Hope's cradle. "She is born between two worlds," Joseph explained. "She will need strength from both." When the storm finally passed, the sun returned, lighting the snow in shades of gold and blue. Evelyn lay in bed, her daughter asleep beside her. Thomas sat at her side, his scarred hand resting lightly on hers. "You're everything I hoped for," he whispered, "more than I deserve." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "You promised me more than shelter and a ring," she said. "You promised me love." He leaned down and kissed her, their daughter between them, a tiny bridge between two wounded hearts, and this time neither of them were afraid. Together they had weathered storms, and together they would face all the days still to come. The quiet girl, who once scrubbed floors and whispered prayers in the attic, had become a wife, a mother, and a woman of the frontier. In the end, Evelyn realized love wasn't found in grand gestures or perfect moments. It lived in the small, quiet choices, to stay, to fight, to hope. And across the vast Colorado sky, hope now carried her name.